Nevada is a grassroots nonprofit organization that advocates for policies empowering everyday Asian Pacific Islander Nevadans. Nevada is home to a growing APIA community, accounting for 1 in 10 voters. We are One APIA Nevada. Tonight's episode of Out in Front is brought to you by our season sponsors, Nevada State Education Association, One APIA Nevada, Silver State Voices, and Stefan and Marta Schmidt.
In front with Annette. I am not in front of the building today. I am inside the building because it is very cold outside, but I am at the legislative building. So you're going to hear some background noise. Just bear with us. That's what happens when we're out in the wild at the legislative building. I am so excited to have our two guests today. We have Carrie Dermick, who's joining us from All Voting is Local, and we have our dear friend and board member, Chris Daly, who's joining us from the Nevada State Education Association. So want to say hello and welcome to you both. Thank you for joining us. Carrie, I'm going to actually start with you. Lots of voting rights stuff this session. Tell folks what All Voting is Local does and the good work that you and your team are doing here in the building.
Yeah, so I'm the state director for All Voting is Local, and really our primary purpose is to dismantle barriers to the ballot box before we get to election day. So we work not just in election years, but also outside the election years. So this year, some of the stuff that we're focused on during legislative session is, of course, just general voting rights legislation, but also diving really deeply into language access and tribal voting access as well, too.
Cool. So let's talk about some of those bills. Let's talk about the tribal access one first. What will that bill do, and who is actually looking at sponsoring that bill?
Yeah, so we have a couple different ideas out for tribal access right now. So some of the things that we're looking into is basically how do we improve upon all the progress that, organizations like Native Voters Alliance has made, and like the Nevada Indian Commission, even though they're a government agency, they have done so much for the Native community across Nevada. And so how do we expand upon that voter access that we literally have nearly doubled the amount of polling places since 2020 to 2022. So we want to keep expanding on that. So looking into things like how do we make sure that our county clerks have a relationship with our tribal governments? And then also, how do we make sure that every tribal government that wants a polling place gets one? So those are the two ideas that we're looking into. And currently, we've been talking to the Senate Legislative Operation Elections Committee about sponsoring that. And so once we figure that out, we'll hear about that as soon as possible. Yeah.
Okay, so talk to us about the details of some of the other bills that we're working on together.
Yeah. Our main priority bill this year is going to be our language access bill, which is being sponsored by Assemblywoman Torres. And so we don't have a bill number yet, but the BDR number is BDR 24821. And so what this bill is going to be focusing on is expanding voting in multiple languages across the state of Nevada. And the reason that Nevada needs this is just a fun fact. Almost 30% of the Nevada population speaks another language at home besides English. And so this isn't just a Clark County or a Washoe County issue. This is a statewide issue that we really need to figure out and make sure that every single voter has access to the ballot across the state. So some of the things that this bill is going to do is it's going to provide voter education materials and election updates in Spanish, Mandarin, Vietnamese, Korean, Thai, and any other languages as needed. It's going to provide a hotline number that voters can call year-round to receive interpretation or translation assistance about voting information and voter assistance. And then it will allocate funding for the translation of voter education materials and to county clerks, basically to provide a in-person paper ballot to anybody that in one of these languages that wants to vote in person. And you'll have to basically meet a threshold in order for this to happen. But we have that threshold figured out with Assemblywoman Torres, and hopefully we'll get some bill language in about 2 weeks. And it's going to do a lot of other things, but this is just a couple of the few things that we're working on right now. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. I want to talk about some of the maybe not so great bills we might see this session. Obviously, the voter ID bills are a hot topic this session. It's always a hot topic when the Republicans are in charge, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We know that voter ID is incredibly dangerous for so many reasons. And I think the reason why you saw the recent polling is because Nevadans don't understand why voter ID is such a problematic thing. So, Carrie, can you talk to us about why voter ID is so problematic and what specifically makes it problematic? And, I have even referred to it as a poll tax at some times.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So, basically it's been shown that voter ID actually discourages voter participation, particularly from voters of color and young voters. And then also want to include our Indigenous community in Nevada to this, because they have already been shut out of the ballot box for so many decades, and right now just getting access. And so if we put another barrier on this community, we're definitely going to discourage participation. And, going back to the tribal community, they already have an ID issue with tribal IDs. And so that is just going to impact them more. And so really, I think bad actors are pushing for voter ID based on baseless voter fraud allegations. There's no need for it here in Nevada. Voters are verified through a signature verification system here in Nevada, and our election system was just given an A rating from the Institute for Responsive Government, and is only one of 4 states in the entire country to get an A rating. This is an attempt to fix a problem that doesn't exist, and it's an attempt to shut out these communities from participating in voting in the 2024 election and beyond. There's just no reason for this, and we don't need it in any way.
So one of the tenets of one of the bills that I've seen, AB 88, which is Assemblyman Haven's bill, states that, well, we're just going to give everybody free IDs. Like, that's going to solve the problem somehow. We're just going to give everybody a free ID. Obviously, there's still barriers to that. There's transportation issues. There's all kinds of different issues. Talk to us about why making people access an ID to vote is not acceptable.
Yeah. So, even if you say you're going to give free IDs, I think a good example is, other bills that we've seen, Nevada doesn't do any outreach about processes or things like that. So how are people going to know that they can get a free ID in order to vote? So really, it's just another bureaucratic step in order to vote. It's another barrier in order to vote. It's just absolutely, there's no need for it, especially when people are being verified through their social security number or through their signature or through their ID, if that's how they choose to be verified in our system. I think it's been proven based off vote by mail that Nevadans want options in how they vote. They also should be able to have options in how they are verified to vote. And really, at the core of this, it's creating a barrier, and it's attempting to fix a problem that just is not there.
So the other day we were watching presentations from the different counties, and overwhelmingly, they stated on the record that vote by mail works, and vote by mail was a good thing this past election cycle. It's growing. It's grown since 2020 when we implemented it. Talk to us about why we need to make sure this session we're also protecting things like vote by mail. We're protecting things like same-day voter registration, because I think those things could come up as part of the negotiations at the end of session. So why should Nevadans care about those things?
Yeah, so just like I said before, based off the turnout numbers in vote by mail in 2020 and 2022, Nevadans really enjoy options with their voting process and how they want to vote. And also, just vote by mail, it is a bipartisan issue. We have seen, like in 2020, over 50% of the rural counties use vote by mail, which was higher per capita in both Washoe and Clark County. So this is very popular, not just in Clark County, not just in Washoe County. It is very popular across the state. And then also, going back to our tribal communities again, vote by mail has been able to change the way that they access voting, which is just so important. So we really need to protect this right and the right to vote by mail. And like, for me personally, I think it is so important because you're able to sit down at your kitchen table with your family and talk about these issues. And, like, sometimes our ballots are 10 to 15 pages long, and you can talk these things out with your family. And if that's the way that you choose to vote and that's what works for you, I think you should be able to have the option to do that. And we need to protect that going into this legislative session.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. We'll come back to you in just a few minutes.
Thank
Just
you.
a reminder for those of you at home, if you have questions for Carrie or for Chris tonight, or for me, because we have a lot of bills coming up next week for hearings, put it in the chat. We'd love to answer your questions. We'd love to talk more about what we're doing here in the building every single day. Carrie's been with me all week. Chris has been with me all week. And so we'd love to tell you more about what's going on in the building. All right, Chris, I want to bring you in. Thanks for being here. Talk to us about some of the bills that NSEA is working on this session and some of the things that you're watching.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Annette. The Nevada State Education Association been the voice of Nevada educators for over 120 years. So that's a lot of legislative sessions, right? 60 plus. This legislative session, just like each that we've been involved with in recent years, is a big deal for Nevada schools and for Nevada educators. I think, rightfully so. There's been a lot of focus on funding issues. I think it was interesting, Carrie, talking about Nevada being one of 4 states to get an A. We never hear grades like A's when we talk about education in Nevada. A report that came out last year from the Education Law Center, Nevada was the only state to receive 3 Fs across their 3 funding metrics. So we are on the flip side of the grade book when it comes to schools, unfortunately. So we've been fighting for increased funding, and there's some good news this year, which is there's a large amount of discretionary money in the budget. Revenues over the last year and a half to 2 years have come in stronger than ever in the state of Nevada. And even Governor Lombardo has proposed some relatively significant increases into the K-12 budget. But there's always a sort of a flip side to these stories. Over the last 2 years, I think, as everybody watching knows, the cost of living, the cost of operating schools related to that has gone up as inflation has gone up. So while the governor has talked about $1 billion or $2 billion over 2 years in increases to the education budget, it's important to keep in mind that, one, because of chronic underfunding, that is just a very small payment towards the gap that we have in optimally funding schools. The Commission on School Funding, which was created in the 2019 legislative session, has been doing a lot of studies of this. And initially, they said we needed $3.4 billion extra dollars per year over the course of the next 10 years in order to reach optimal. That number now is adjusted to $2.6 billion. To put it another way, even if the governor's recommended budget gets adopted with that extra $1 billion in it, we're still going to be $4,700 per pupil short of optimal funding and $3,700 short of the national average. So funding's always been a big issue. And at NSEA, we've been talking about time for 20. And I'll just describe that really quick for folks who may be watching who haven't heard me say this before. Time for 20 is designed to address a severe shortage of educators working in Nevada schools. We have right now thousands of vacancies. An ABC News story just came out on the national teacher shortage, and the one reference to Nevada is big problems. That was in a graphic from ABC News, I think it was last night or this morning. So big problems in Nevada with thousands of educator shortage, thousands of educators short in our schools currently in the middle of the school year. So we've seen classes with long-term subs, hundreds, if not thousands of those across the state. Teachers who have to bring 2, 3, 4 classrooms into the auditorium or the gym because they don't have colleagues there to cover classes. Bus routes that have been cut because students were stranded out there last school year for hours and hours because they didn't have drivers to drive the buses. So we're calling for Time for 20, which would mean a 20% educator raise, a minimum wage of $20 for the education support professionals who make schools run, and reaching an average class size of 20 students. That's the Time for 20 campaign. And even though Governor Lombardo talked a lot about teachers in his State of the State address, he made no specific mention of any raise for educators, for teachers, or education support professionals. The Democratic leadership did come behind the governor with a proposal to move $250 million for educator raises. We did say that was a very good start. I think that would get many educators in the state up to a 10% raise next year. But given the cost of living, given the severity of the problem, we're pretty firm on 20. We think 20% is what it's going to take, and that's what we're fighting for in this session.
Thank you for that, Chris. So this week we know it was school choice week at the state legislature. That is why we asked you to be on, because obviously school choice is just another word for vouchers and the Betsy DeVos version of privatizing our education. So talk to us about why this school choice movement is so problematic and the issues with words like school choice or vouchers or opportunity scholarships, because it all basically means the same thing.
Yeah, choice is it's a progressive word, right? That these corporate privatizers stole because it polls well. And so really what they're trying to do is divert public money that needs to go into public schools that serve 90% of Nevada kids. Instead they, want to take that money and they want to, line their pockets. So the specific proposal I guess there's 2 proposals from Governor Lombardo. One is to increase the amount of opportunity scholarships, which I'll define in a minute, which this year is at about $6.7 million, and he wants to raise that to $50 million in the budget. So a kind of a seismic increase in opportunity scholarships. He also wants to create a new office. It's got some pleasant sounding title, Office of School Choice or something, but he wants to create a private school voucher office in the governor's office, and so that's kind of his rollout. He did stop short of introducing education savings accounts, which was a big fight that we had in 2015, and then in 2017. We were able to block those education savings accounts, more of a universal voucher program in the courts, and then politically we were able to stop it. But an opportunity scholarship is a private school voucher, just with another fancy name. Basically what they do is they go to corporations who are required to pay business tax, and they give them a dollar for dollar tax holiday for every dollar that they give to one of these third-party voucher organizations, and then those voucher organizations then hand out the vouchers. There are some income restrictions on the opportunity scholarship program that some of the Democrats got in there when they were dealing in-game, kind of negotiations with Republicans over other items, and allowed these things to continue. But we got to be clear. Currently, an opportunity scholarship's $8,700. And that's $8,700 of taxes that a corporation would be paying to the state, that the state could then distribute to school districts to educate all Nevada kids. And instead, that money is going ultimately to a private school in the state.
You know, Trustee Guzman is in the chat, obviously one of your fabulous members. She says, and I think this is right, public schools offer choice through magnet schools and other options. Talk to us about why taking public tax dollars, my tax dollars, and giving them to a religious institution or a private school is so problematic, Chris. And also talk about the accountability or the lack thereof when it comes to these charter schools and private schools and how they can discriminate against kids, things like that.
So there's all sorts of problems in that. And hello, Trustee Guzman. Thanks for watching. First of all, let's do some myth busting. One, private schools, when you correct for demographic differences around income, race, disability, etc. Private schools do not outperform our neighborhood or traditional public schools. So public schools are as good, we believe, better than private schools. But what really is going on here, largely, or there's several things, but one of the mainstream things that's going on here is that this is a resegregation play in schools. When oftentimes critical of big data, but when you go through kind of the Google searches of schools, and particularly private schools, they're searching the racial demographics of the student population. So basically what I'm saying is that parents are looking to send their kids, to schools that, basically are, a resegregation of our schools. And so if you're able to take public money, which should go to public schools, and as I talked about earlier, in Nevada in particular, public schools are chronically underfunded. You have a limited amount of tax money, even though we've got a good year this year. Most years aren't like this this year, and we're still way behind. So you have a limited amount of money. If you're going to take that money, and instead of putting it into the districts and the institutions that are educating 90% of our kids, including a very high percentage of those kids who are low income, a very high percentage of those kids who are English learners, et cetera, et cetera. And instead, you want to cut off, a voucher for $9,000 to subsidize a kid going to a private school. That's what these things are. In terms of the private schools, it's a different system. So you look at the religious schools, discrimination in those schools, certain, there's others that talk to this issue better than I do, but you get some of these religious private schools. Those are not places for many of our kids, who don't subscribe to that, particular, worldview, or in terms of their identity, don't identify as, straight or, particular belief system, or what have you. So you still have those vestiges of discrimination within those some of those private school communities.
Trustee Guzman is in the chat again. Private schools can turn anyone away, whereas public schools cannot. Public schools educate all of our kids, and I think that's an important distinction. Okay, I want to take some audience questions. We've got a lot for you, Chris, but we also have a few for you too, Carrie. So, Carrie, I'm going to start with you. So Aaron asks in the chat, if voter ID discourages voting, why are some people pushing for it so hard?
I mean, really, they don't have a reason. Like, I've looked through their talking points, and they recently, some of the Republican legislators put out an op-ed, and really their only reason is because if you have to show an ID on a plane, you should show an ID to vote. That's really their only reason for it. But again, this is just an attempt to solve a problem that isn't there. And it's honestly, in my opinion, and from all voters locals' opinion, like, this is an attempt to discourage voting from voters of color and from youth voters. That's really what I think the main point is, and to again create fear around baseless allegations of voter fraud from 2020 and 2022 that just never happened. So I really think that is where the point of view is coming from, and why we should not, let this see the light of day.
Carrie, another question for you. Lisa Lynn asks, I have read several articles about suggested changes to our vote by mail program, primarily changing the due dates. Are you seeing those sort of bills, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so the only one that I have seen so far is SB 135. And so currently mail ballots that are mailed to the county clerk, they must be postmarked on or before election day, and they must be received by 5 p.m. on the fourth day following the election. So what this bill wants to do is this bill would require mail ballots to be postmarked before on the last day of early voting and received by 5 p.m. on the fourth day of the last day of early voting. So to me, for my opinion on this, I think that, again, this is just another attempt to create a barrier to voting, and another attempt to solve a problem that just isn't an issue. Really, there's no problem here. They just are creating. It's like almost like they're creating a problem with this bill, and then also basically it's saying if you want to vote by mail, your option will be more limited to anybody that votes in person. It really creates an unfair perspective from voting by mail versus voting in person. And so really separating the two options from, you can vote on election day, but if you vote by mail, you cannot. And so I think this is a non-starter, and this shouldn't see the light of day. And we should continue to have the system that we currently have, that if you do want to vote by mail, your ballot must be postmarked by election day by 5 p.m. Yeah.
Carrie, another question in the chat for you. It's on voter ID as well.
Okay.
Recent polling showed overwhelming support for it here in Nevada.
Mm-hmm.
But, how do we show power in our opposition despite that? And I would add, how do we also better educate Nevadans? Because I think with education, they probably wouldn't be so supportive.
Yeah. And I think, again, like, this is only one poll. It's only one poll you've seen, right? Like, polls don't always tell us everything. So I think a couple of ways that we can show our opposition. So the first way is you can submit opinions on the Nevada legislative website. So like, feel free to submit an opinion on AB 88, and then you can call your legislator and tell them your opinion on this bill. And then I think a really, really powerful way is like, talk to your friends and neighbors and family about why we do not need voter ID here in Nevada. And then as far as like education goes, like, work with awesome organizations like Battleborn Progress and All Voters Local and our Voting Rights Coalition to learn more about how to get involved and why voter ID shouldn't happen in Nevada.
Yeah, and if voter ID does get a hearing, we will be the first to let y'all know about that. We hear it's coming here in the next maybe 2 weeks. And so we think everyone should be ready for that. And if you are in opposition of voter ID, obviously we're going to need you to show up here in Carson City at Grant Sawyer. You can call in, but we're definitely going to need you to make your voices heard in opposition to that bill for all of the reasons Carrie listed and so many more. And we'll have talking points and an action alert for you to send information to your legislators as well. So definitely going to need your voices on this issue, because I fear we're going to have to fight to make sure that we can keep our voting rights intact, that we've worked on so many sessions together. So thank you, Carrie. I want to come back to you, Chris, really quickly. I want to start with something that actually was proposed this week, Chris, by Assemblywoman Howdigee. And it's a question in the chat. What are your thoughts on funding for free school breakfasts and lunches? And that's something that the Assembly Democrats put out this week. And how much difference does that make in the lives of our students? And I think that's 50 million reasons why we should give kids free lunches over $50 million for school vouchers.
That's 51 or 53 million, I think, but close enough. Educators, I think, have long been supportive of school meal programs. I think, two things. One, every teacher knows that kids cannot learn and certainly are not at their best when they've got an empty stomach and they're hungry. So there's, for many decades, there's been obviously school meals and school breakfast programs in this country based on that. But I think in recent years, certainly with COVID, we saw things like food insecurity and the role that schools could play in terms of serving communities, right? Not just the kids, but those kids' families as well. A lot of our members in those early days of the pandemic, kind of stepped up and were kind of on those, food distribution lines, working them for the kids and the families. And, schools are, our neighborhood public schools. They are oftentimes kind of the center of, communities. And so when you have, social issues, I don't think that you can solve all social issues in schools or with schools, but certainly as an important institution in the community, that's a great place to have, services and resources, not just for kids, but for families and the broader community as well. So, certainly, the free meals, the universal free meals, there's a lot of upside and smart public policy around that to reduce some of the stigma around, the free and reduced lunch and the kids who get that versus the kids that don't. Everybody, also all students need to eat, even, ones that, don't have food insecurity issues at home. But maybe they didn't get a meal, that morning. Maybe they were rushing out of the house. And so I think it's good public policy. It's a good use of resources, and it's, the right thing to do by students, educators, and the broader community.
All right. Another person in the chat has a question for you, Chris. They say, outside of Time for 20, what other investments in education would you recommend? So
there is some good news in the governor's recommended budget. Just a quick caveat, before leaving office, former Governor Sisolak talked about what he would do if he had been reelected on his budget. And his budget was better even for schools than Governor Lombardo's budget. But some good things in the budget. There's something called weights in the new funding formula, and basically what these weights are, there are extra dollars for schools who have students who are either at risk, which I'll talk about in a second, or English learners. Students with disabilities receive additional funds federally. And so I think, one of the, knowns in education over the last several decades is that there are some student populations that just require more attention, more resources. Obviously, someone learning English, fits that category. In this other weight of at risk, which they're now saying is at risk of graduating, was initially a weight around just income. And so for folks who are facing challenges at home or in their communities, that have, more social issues or social dynamics that kids need to navigate. When they're outside of school, those things impact kids when they're in school. And so additional resources there are important. And not to get into too much detail, one of the downsides of this is while these weights are fully funded, the definition of at-risk was changed so that basically only 25% of the kids really meet that definition, because they basically made a cut score on it at a certain level so they could say they fully funded the weights. But money going to those things is critical, especially in Nevada, that's got one of the highest student populations that is at risk, and one of the highest student populations of English learners as well.
Chris, I think this is a good question for you to wrap on. How can we encourage more young people, but more people generally, to become educators?
I mean, I don't know if I'm a good one to wrap on. I spend a lot of my time talking to my members who are educators who are looking to leave the profession. And so, I think what we have to do is we have to figure out how to make the job of teacher or the job of, educator, whether you're, school counselor, or whether you are working in, the school cafeteria. Like, we have to make those jobs, more appealing. Part of that, in terms of our Time for 20 campaign, is, making the pay more competitive. In teaching, there's something kind of very commonly known as the teacher pay gap, where teachers across the United States of America make about 23% less than similar professional workers in other occupations. And so, you have to go to college, you have to, take on, the student loans. Then you go and you're teaching, and for a lot of teachers and a lot of other educators, it's a calling. But if you can't make ends meet with it, it's not sustainable kind of for a whole career or the long haul. So there's all sorts of stories out on the internet right now about teachers leaving, going working at Costco and being happier, and that's just wild. So a part of it is compensation in terms of making these jobs, better jobs. But part of it is working conditions as well. So we talk about class sizes. Nevada has the largest or second largest class sizes in the country. That makes a tough job impossible. If you have 35, 40 kids, 45 kids in a classroom, in some cases, in Clark County, it's an impossible ask. Add to that legitimate issues of safety in our schools. We've seen an uptick in violence generally in our schools, and a couple of just really terrible, high-profile incidents where teachers have been hurt or almost killed in the last couple of years. That's tough. If you're scared and fearful for your safety in your job, that's not gonna work out well for the long term. And then a lot of our educators feel like they haven't had their voices listened to with regards to all sorts of issues, from evaluations to grading to taking attendance to not having enough time for preparation for lesson planning and that sort of thing. And so put all that stuff together, we got an issue. But what you say to what I would say to young people is, we're fighting to make this right. And one good thing about, probably the best thing about working for a union, is I have members who care about kids, who, are generally very progressive politically, who want to see, schools be like just great places. And, they're fighting for that. We're fighting for that, and hopefully we'll get there.
Awesome. Chris, how do folks get involved with your organization during session, and how do folks support the good work that you're doing this session?
Well, folks should, if folks are on the Twitter, I'm not the biggest fan I was not the biggest fan of Twitter before Elon. With that said, it is probably the best place to kind of follow on a real-time basis what we're up to. It's at NSCA online on the Twitter, or you can go to our website, which is nsca-nv.org. Keep up with us. I'm around. Folks can just, grab my arm and ask me what's going on, or send me a message. Happy to chat.
And Carrie, same question for you. How do folks get involved with All Voting is Local? And, how do folks make sure that they're following the good work that y'all are doing here in the building?
Yeah, so just go to our website, go to allvotingslocal.org, and you can sign up for our email list there and keep up to date on what is going on with voting rights during legislative session. And then also, I would suggest go to Twitter and just follow All Voting is Local on Twitter to keep up with everything.
Awesome. Thank you, Carrie. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate y'all so much. I want to give y'all a couple of updates on our bills that are happening next week. We have a lot of going on here in the building. And so every week now, whether I'm hosting or one of our teammates are hosting, we're going to give you some bill updates to look forward into the next week. So this way, you know what's coming up. The first one, which is super important on Monday, we actually just sent out an action alert for it, is Senate Bill 131. That's Senator Canizaro's bill on codifying the abortion executive order from Governor Sisolak's time, making it so that if people travel here to get abortions, they are not criminalized for that. So that is being heard on Monday in Senate Commerce and Labor. We're obviously going to be there testifying in support of it. I hope you will too. You can also call in on the phone, but that's going to be a really important bill that's happening on Monday. Also on Monday, things that we're following, we have AB 138. That's going to give the ability for Medicaid to cover some behavioral health services. It's sponsored by Assembly Health and Human Services, and it's going to be heard by Health and Human Services on the Assembly side. We're also following Assembly Bill 163, which provides leave and other employment protections for workers who suffer sexual assault. That is sponsored by Assemblywoman Gonzalez and others. Definitely would love for you all to turn out and support that bill as well. We also have Senate Bill 142. That's Senator Harris's Homeless Bill of Rights. That's going to be in Senate Judiciary on Monday. On Tuesday, we are going to have Senate Bill 133. That's Senator Daley's fake electors bill at Senate Legislative Operations and Elections. On Wednesday, we have SB 153 by Senator Scheibel, and that's a transgender prisoner protections bill in Senate Judiciary Committee. And we have SB 20, that is a bill for filling vacancies within the Clark County Oversight Committee for Metropolitan Police Department. So that's something that we're following as well. And that's going to be in Senate Government or Senate Growth, Senate GA. I don't remember what that means. So when my staff is doing this next time, just don't give me acronyms. But yeah, that's going to be on Monday, or I'm sorry, on Wednesday. So lots going on next week because there are a ton of bills floating around now. Happy news today. Senate Bill 171 is going to be our hate crimes bill that bans people who are convicted of committing hate crimes from owning weapons for up to 10 years. So take a look at that bill. Senator Harris is carrying that bill for us, and we're super excited about that bill. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. If you have questions about the Nevada legislature, let us know in the chat. We're happy to answer any of your questions. I'll put my email in the chat for all of you. So my team will put that in there. But if you have questions on the legislative process or you want to get involved with us, just email me at annette@battlebornprogress.org, and we are happy to get you involved with the legislative process. Next week, we're going to be back out in front Thursday at 5 p.m. And we are doing a special on Black History Month. Brian from our team is going to be hosting next week. We have a fabulous panel of legislators, elected officials from across the state, and other folks from the community to talk about Black History Month as it relates to climate change and the climate crisis specifically impacting the Black community. So excited to have that conversation next week, and excited to have Brian host his first Out in Front. So we will see y'all next week. Thank you all for joining us. We'll be live at 5 on Thursday. You don't want to miss this conversation. Thanks again, Chris and Carrie. We appreciate your help and support, and we will see y'all next week. Have a great evening, everyone.